everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories Podcast. Today is a very special day for the podcast. We're re-releasing our very first episode, the story of Angelina Garramone.
That's a good story.
It's such a good story. So, like I said, it was the first episode. I was doing it on my own. Mom hadn't joined me yet. And I don't go listen to the first episode, but it's awkward. And, it was my first time getting into all of this. And, it's like an hour long, the first one. And it covers so much. So I've been wanting to redo this one for a while because it's probably one of my absolute favorite stories. And truly kind of the one story that sparked the creation of this podcast.
Yeah.
So
you always did like that. So,
well, even when I do, other interviews with people and they ask me about the podcast, I always refer back to Angelina's story because it was so fascinating.
Yeah. She's an amazing woman. There's a lot to this episode.
There is. Yeah. A lot to her. Like she's amazing and a little scary. And
yeah.
She was one of the very first articles I ever ran across about an Italian American that I wasn't related to, because I've always loved genealogy and researching family.
Right.
But as I'd be researching our family, I would run across articles about Italian Americans I didn't know. And I think she was like the first article I ever ran across. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And so I'd kept it forever and then ran across it one day and I was like, somebody needs to tell this story. And like I said, she's kind of the spark that created the podcast.
I think I've forgotten a lot of it. So
I went through the script, because it's been, I don't even know, 2 years since. It's been 2 years. Yeah.
I think I looked and it was March of 23.
March of 23 was when we started the podcast. Yeah. So it's been a while. So, and I was going through the script and I was like, whoa, I forgot about some of this stuff. But I think what we're going to do is break it into 3 maybe, keep them around like 30, 35 minutes. Mainly just, there's so much in her story.
Right.
That it gets to be too convoluted in one episode.
Right.
So let's rediscover Angelina's fascinating and scandalous story. So she was born Maria Angelina Concetta Lasasso on June 16th, 1876 in Potenza, the Basilicata region, which is where our family is from.
Yeah.
And she settled in Denver in 1881. And those dates kind of vary. Sometimes the census says 1885, but she came over when she was 5 years old. In Denver, her father, he became a pretty well-off farmer, but after a few successful years of farming, he sold his farm and moved into the city, particularly Denver's Little Italy area, and he started dealing in real estate, which probably inspired Angelina to eventually get into the real estate business. But she took a twist on that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, her father, he passed away in 1910, and he left Angelina $20,000, which today is about $625,000. So he did really well for himself.
That's a lot of money.
That is so much money. So Angelina, she met Luigi Garramone in Denver, and on February 3rd, 1891, they married. She was 15 and he was 25. And Luigi, he was also born in Potenza. He was born in 1866. So Luigi and Angelina, they went on to have 12 children. Sadly, though, 6 of their children passed away. And Luigi, he was a vegetable peddler, and he sold his vegetables at what was called the city market in Denver. In the city market, it was just a large market in the downtown area where vegetable peddlers, farmers, they went to sell their goods. At this time, of course, they brought it with a horse and a wagon.
Right.
And what a time to, it'd be so cool to just be a fly on the wall back then and watch that kind of stuff. But later on, Luigi, he actually opened up a restaurant and he called it the House of Luigi, which was located in the home that he owned with Angelina. Their kids eventually took over the restaurant in 1936, and it actually stayed open until 1958, which...
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good.
In their home.
I think the restaurant moved at one point from the home to an actual establishment. So there's not a whole lot of information during the early years of their marriage and their life together. I imagine they're just kind of having babies, creating a life. They were also becoming pretty well-known members in the Little Italy at this time. Everybody knows Angelina. Yeah. What I could find was that Angelina, she really enjoyed studying astrology. Luigi didn't like this, but she didn't care. She liked it. She kind of got into the astrology, tarot cards. And because of this, many people referred to Angelina as a fortune teller. And she also really loved to read books, which, being a woman, an Italian immigrant, these are kind of taboo things.
That's interesting.
And actually, during one interview, she told a reporter that she read St. Elmo, and St. Elmo at this time was the third best-selling novel in the 19th century and was categorized as a Victorian romance. And so I think that this is like where the taboo part comes in with her reading, because she liked to read the romance and stuff like that.
Makes sense.
And I guess apparently, like, during this interview, she was blushing, telling the reporter about it. Now, Luigi's family, they experienced kind of a tragic event in 1903 when Luigi's brother, Pasquale, he was shot and killed by Michael Brienza. And apparently this all started over 50 cents and some celery. And 50 cents is worth about $15 today. So one day, Pasquale and Michael, they were at the market selling their vegetables, and Pasquale told Brienza, and remember Pasquale is Luigi's brother, to pay him the 50 cents he owed him for some celery. And Brienza insisted, nope, I've already paid you the week before. And so they start arguing back and forth, but this quickly turned into a scuffle with the two men fighting on the ground. And during the scuffle, Brienza, he pulled out a revolver and shot Pasquale in the abdomen. Surprisingly, Pasquale, he actually lived for 3 weeks, but ultimately passed away from the gun wound. Can't imagine
All over celery.
Can you imagine how painful his last 3 weeks were? A gunshot and wound, and this was what year? 1903.
Oh boy.
My goodness. So we have the dogs in the podcast studio with us again. And of course, Lucy is snoring. So if you hear some weird noises, again, it's not Mom and I.
I'm still awake.
Yeah, Mom's still awake. So crazy dogs. So Brienza, he claimed that he shot Pasquale in self-defense because he was scared because Pasquale was so much larger than him. But Brienza was arrested and eventually found guilty for manslaughter, and he was sentenced to prison. However, just a couple of months later, a judge asked the governor to pardon Brienza in order to, quote, save the country the expense of caring for a large family. I mean, he still took a man's life, though. It's crazy. So Brienza, he did have 5 children and a wife, and his youngest child was actually born while he was in prison. This first pardon attempt was actually denied, but he was released and only served a total of 6 months. But because of this whole situation that happened over celery, it actually created a long-time feud between the Garramone family and the Brienza family. In a really strange turn of events, Brienza, he was actually almost murdered by a man in 1908. He had a dream that someone was going to try and murder him. And out of worry, he walked around the next few days wearing an iron breastplate. This dream really freaked him out.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you imagine how hot this must have been? Summers get pretty toasty in Denver. He's outside gardening in an iron breastplate.
Sounds like he might have had a few enemies.
I think so too. Yeah. He was
just to be that afraid of a dream.
Yeah, get that upset over celery. I mean,
right.
But a few days after this dream, he was out working in his garden when a strange man approached him and asked for a match, maybe to light his pipe or something. I don't know. So while Brienza was reaching for the match, the man pulled out a knife and stabbed him.
Wow.
Like you said, I think he had a lot of enemies.
Right.
He was a paranoid person. Luckily, though, this knife, it hit the iron breastplate and freaked the man out, and the man just took off. He was probably like, what in the world? You know?
Yeah.
So weird. And so Brienza, he reported this to the police and told them that he had a vision that it was actually Pasquale's children or brothers coming to kill him. So that's kind of where it ties in and kind of shows that feud and that between the two families. I couldn't find if anyone was ever arrested for this, or if Michael was ever able to identify the man. But so now around 1902, Angelina, she really starts to pop up in the newspapers of Denver. There's headlines that refer to her as Beauty in the Plot. The Italian beauty is suing Michael Vecca. We'll kind of go into this story, but I just thought that was kind of a funny headline. So the paper, it describes this weird kind of relationship between Angelina and Michael. Now, keep in mind, Angelina is married at this time. So the paper describes Angelina as a beautiful woman and Michael Vecca as a handsome young Italian. But in the article, Angelina describes Michael as being bloodthirsty and claims he had made numerous threats to kill her. Apparently, Angelina had some type of paperwork that belonged to Michael's mother-in-law, and Angelina was not giving the papers back. I don't know what type of paperwork this is. My guess is it was probably related to real estate.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, and if you remember anything from the first episode, Angelina liked the real estate business. But one day, Angelina was standing on West 38th Avenue, which is the street she lived on. It's kind of one of the large avenues that runs through Denver's Little Italy. And she's waiting for somebody to come pick her up. Well, at the same time, Michael was leaving his house to go to work, and he sees Angelina, and he goes up to her and tells her, quote, "Angelina, are you going to take those papers back to my mother-in-law? Because if you don't, I will murder you." And he also told Angelina that this is the last day of your life. And so, of course, this is all according to Angelina, this is just her story. And Angelina responded to Michael by saying, "Here is my life, take it, I am not afraid of dying." And all of this just seems so dramatic to me. Can you imagine all this happening on 38th Avenue? At this point, Michael apparently put his hand kind of like towards his hip, like where a pistol holster would be. Of course, Angelina took this as a threat. And after this, Angelina called the police, and an officer showed up, and he asked Angelina if Michael actually drew his pistol. And Angelina said no, but she saw the black handle of the pistol. And the police officer apparently believed that Michael did have a pistol, but he couldn't prove it. So the officer later that night showed up to the saloon that Michael worked at. And once the officer got to the saloon, he searched Michael and found a pistol. This just seems so lawless.
A lot of drama.
Exactly. However, Michael was not arrested because he was able to convince the officer that he needed to be armed since he worked in a saloon downtown, which is probably true in the early 1900s in Denver, Colorado. Anywhere, I guess. But he did get a ticket for concealing a weapon. Maybe he didn't have a permit, or they even had permits back then.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So now during the trial and the hearing for all of this, Michael's attorney asked Angelina if she knew Michael before the day he threatened her. And Angelina claimed that she only knew him by sight, but never spoke to him before that day. And Michael swore that he did not have a pistol. He did admit, though, during the hearing that in the past he had served 6 years in prison for murder. So that's not great for him, but...
Wow.
So Michael's attorney, he told the court that he believes there were actually ulterior motives to Angelina's suit against him. And he reminded the court and the judge that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But he just doesn't know why Angelina is scorned. So I think what he's getting at here is there was some sort of a relationship between the two
going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it went sour for some reason. Because why would she be carrying some random man's mother-in-law's papers? It just doesn't make sense. And so at this statement, Angelina apparently threw up her hands in disgust, which I can almost just picture that, like a woman in the courtroom being like, "Oh my gosh."
I don't even like the guy.
Exactly, right? But a few days after this, an article came out in the Denver Post, and it does give a few clues to why Angelina may have been scorned. So Michael ended up testifying that he believes Angelina was actually in love with him and wished to marry him. However, he turned her down, and that is why all of this happened. Keep in mind, Michael and Angelina are both married at this time, and the paper referred to Michael's wife as a very feminine and tiny woman. And I don't know if they were trying to compare his wife to Angelina, but it's just kind of funny. Now, in an odd turn of events, though, Michael may have been telling the truth about Angelina being in love with him, because that same year, Angelina filed a suit in the district court against Concetta Brindisi for slander. So Angelina claimed that Concetta accused her of trying to seduce her son-in-law, Joseph, to leave his wife and children and elope with her. So it seems a little similar to what Michael is claiming. A little bit of a pattern here. She wants Michael to leave his wife and marry her. She wants this Joseph to leave his wife and marry her. So Angelina called Concetta of vile names like a common prostitute and stated, that she was trying to ruin her good name. And Concetta, she even accused Angelina of trying to chloroform Joseph. And to me, this seems a little far-fetched, but what was she going to do? Like chloroform Joseph, drag him to her basement and force him to fall in love with her? However, we are talking about Angelina here though. So, who knows? I kind of wanted to tell these stories just to sort of give a background of Angelina,
who she really is,
who she is, and kind of, what was coming out in the newspapers about her. And now I'm assuming this case between her conflict with Michael and her conflict with Concetta, I think that they were both dismissed because I could never really find anything stating otherwise. And I just have to wonder, what was Luigi thinking during all of this? Because they were married and she's getting accused of, asking other men to leave their wives to marry her. And, keep in mind, there's always two sides to a story, but just makes me wonder what was going through his head.
Right.
Can't be good. So now we're going to start talking about some of Angelina's scams, I guess you could say. So on top of all of this love drama, whatever you want to call it, Angelina was slowly building up her reputation as, quote, the Queen of Little Italy. She was known to many Italians in Denver's Little Italy as La Diavola Rosa. This was because she had red hair. And so like the Red Devil.
Oh, okay.
And one shop owner in Denver described who Angelina was by saying, quote, she gathers people around her. They find out too much, then poof, we see them no more. And next we hear of their bones being found.
Oh, wow.
So
that's eerie.
And that's another Italian describing her in Little Italy. Yeah, that's really eerie. That's a good way to put it. Now, if you look up Angelina, you will sometimes hear her obviously referred to as La Diavola, but she's also became known as the Cassie Chadwick of Denver's Little Italy. That was the pseudonym for a famous con artist named Elizabeth Bigley. And basically, Chadwick, she defrauded numerous Canadian banks out of millions of dollars during the late 1800s and early 1900s. And she accomplished this by claiming that she was the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Carnegie. And so she had like forged a promissory note from Andrew Carnegie and used this to get loans from major banks in America and Canada.
Wow.
So
and then walked away.
So like I said, you'll hear Angelina referred to as Cassie Chadwick, Queen of Little Italy. I like Queen of Little Italy better, but so Angelina, she also began dealing in real estate with her father before he passed away. And honestly, real estate, it was Angelina's largest scam that she pulled off in Denver.
Oh, here we go.
Yep. Now, sadly, though, what makes this scam even worse was Angelina primarily scammed her fellow Italians. You know, a lot of them spoke barely, if any, English, and they trusted her to look out for them and help them kind of maneuver their way through a new country. So what Angelina would do is she would gain the trust of the Italians in the Denver area and ask them what they thought their property was worth. Obviously, they didn't really understand. They're just brand new to this country. But then, you know, they would tell her what they thought it was worth, and she would then offer them a few $100s more than what they thought the property was worth. And they felt like, oh, wow, she's giving me more money than what my property's even worth. So it's just kind of sad to think about. And a lot of them were from the same region as her. So there was that trust layer there. And so she would tell them things like, well, you don't want to live in this area. It's considered the slums where you live. So I'll take this property off of your hands so you can move to a different part of town. But once Angelina got the house, she would either sell the property for what it was truly worth or rent it out and make a monthly income off of it. On top of all this, she was also accused of forging many of their names to the deeds of properties. So she would make it look like they sold her the property for some ridiculously low amount of money, and then she would turn around and sell the property and leave them homeless or force them to pay rent to her.
Wow.
And so sometimes they didn't even know that their property was being taken. She just did it. I went through all of the newspapers that I could and the archived Denver real estate records to investigate and find all of her real estate transactions. And Luigi was a little bit of a part of this as well. And I actually found a total of 71 transactions. There could be more.
Wow.
I know. And because the spelling of their names was all over the place. You know, I would check alternative spellings and find a few more transactions. And so I probably missed some, but I found 71 for sure. And some of the transactions are really odd. Angelina or Luigi, they would buy a property and then sell it back to themselves for the same amount they bought it, which it makes no sense unless you're trying to commit some kind of a fraud. I mean,
yeah, there's some loophole going on in there
that they figured out. And so, like, for example, there are 3 transactions for the same property that range from September 29th, 1909 to February 22nd, 1910. So September 29th, 1909, Angelina sold the property to a woman named Carmela. Then October 9th, 1909, Angelina sold it again to Carmela. And then in February 22nd, 1910, Carmela turned around and sold it to Angelina. And each time, each of these records, the amount is the same. It's for $4,500. But it's just very weird. It's the exact same property. I mean, maybe there's a reason for it and I just don't know. I'm not a real estate person. But it just looks a little fishy to me.
Yeah, something's going on.
And she does get in trouble for real estate fraud. So in the newspaper, the Denver Post actually described her as a cunning businesswoman who, quote, as a woman of business, her brain was far superior to any man in the colony. In other ways, she was far below the average intelligence. So whatever that means, and how these newspapers writers were gauging this, I don't know, but it's just almost like they're complimenting her and insulting her at the same time.
Right.
And I actually find myself with her. There's times where I'm impressed with her and I'm like, she is kind of amazing. But then like, you almost don't want to say that because of what she does. You know, she frauds, she takes advantage of her own people. She eventually ends up murdering. But there's times where I can't help being impressed with her because I think if she could have narrowed her focus in a good way, she would have been a game changer.
Right.
So in 1909, a complaint was sent to the Italian consulate against Angelina for all the fraudulent real estate transactions. And an article came out in the Denver Rocky Mountain News, and it stated that thousands of dollars were lost along with the properties of many Italians. So Angelina got an attorney. She knew she was in trouble at this point. And her attorney, E.N. Clover, claimed that these complaints were coming too early and they needed to wait for Angelina's plan to come to maturity. So I don't know what that means, but her attorney also stated that many of Angelina's fellow Italians were not as business-minded as Angelina and just basically didn't understand the, quote, mutually agreed upon transaction that took place, which really makes me laugh because if it's mutually agreed upon, but one party doesn't understand, then it's not mutually agreed upon. Right. So now in between these real estate transactions, fraud, scam, whatever you want to call it, Angelina also had a piano scam going on. So an article came out in the Denver Post on April 24th, 1910, describing this new scam of hers. So apparently Angelina would rent pianos from a local company in Denver and even pay the rent a few weeks in advance, but then turn around and sell the pianos for a profit. So, I mean, she would have had to have made a good profit to offset the cost of the rent she paid.
Right. Piano.
And how do you move these pianos?
That's what I was thinking. That's a big thing to rent and then try to...
It's not like you rented a typewriter or something.
Right.
And you could just pick it up and hand it to somebody. So now at the end of the article, the author pointed out that Angelina used 3 other names to conduct her business under. She used Angelina Ceretia, Marie Brown, and Rose Wortley. So I looked these names up and I couldn't find anything in the newspaper databases, but I think that's how she was pulling off her scams with the piano companies, giving them different names. So in October of 1909, Angelina was officially charged with forgery because of her real estate dealings. She was charged with 8 counts of forgery, and her charges initially came about from a real estate transaction involving a Giovanni Iacovetta. And Giovanni became aware that the house he owned with his wife was no longer in their names. And he said that neither he nor his wife signed over the deed of their property to Angelina, but he knows that someone signed his name. It just wasn't him. When I researched the real estate records, I found some interesting transactions concerning Giovanni's property. So July 23rd, 1910, Giovanni sold the property supposedly to Angelina for $1.
Well, isn't that kind of obvious?
I know. And that exact day, that very same day that he sold the property to Angelina, Angelina signed the deed over to Dorinda Salante, and the property was again sold for $1. And now remember Dorinda's name. She comes up a little bit later. So a couple of weeks later, on August 6, 1910, Dorinda sold the property back to Angelina for $1, and then that was the end of the transactions. So that, I mean, yeah, that looks really suspicious. That's very $1. I mean,
yeah, I still don't understand that back and forth.
I don't either. Is it to make the records more confusing? Like to convolute it? I don't know. I don't get it either.
Yeah. No, I don't get that.
Because to me, it makes it look more suspicious.
Right.
So Angelina was officially arrested September of 1910. And an article from the Denver Post kind of details her first court hearing and how she ultimately was freed on bail. So during the arraignment, Angelina's family was present and they brought Angelina's youngest child. His name was Tony, and he was just a baby. And Angelina, she pleaded not guilty. And at this moment, baby Tony kind of screamed out and like went into a full meltdown. And I think it was because he heard his mom's voice. And so the author of the article put it as if baby Tony was trying to say, "You blickety bald-headed berserk, of course she's not guilty." Oh, that language is great. Which, of course, later we do learn that she's most definitely guilty, but So Angelina was then handed baby Tony to try and calm him down because the baby was losing it. And the judge was over it at this point. And with this, the judge became so irritated and declared that Angelina's bail stands and she must leave immediately with her baby. So I imagine, he had no patience of listening to a baby screaming and basically said, yeah, you're free on bail. Just leave. Just get out of here. So I'm not, of course, I'm not sure how much of this story is embellished by the author of this article, but I did see 2 different articles recounting this event. So who knows? But I think with that, we're going to stop here and pick it up next week with diving into the major crimes that Angelina commits, which is some murders. So I think this is a good stopping point, though. We've introduced her family,
what type of person she is,
the scams and stuff. Yeah, so we'll dive in. And I do think this is probably going to be 3 or 4 episodes. It's just, there's a lot in her story. And I think we just need to break it up, but yeah.
It's going to be very interesting. So.
It is. I love her story.
Hang in there.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to the first part of Angelina's story, and we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.